Welcome to another video during which I will show you how you can work with a database. So what exactly is a database and why do we need it? To help answer these two questions, we are going to look at the context of our application currently. So I will start my Flask server and navigate to the browser where we can see it. We have two pages, the home page and the login page. In a previous video, we learned how to work with Flask web forms. So far, we have only the login form, and this form contains several fields. We have the username field, the password field, and the remember me field. What we want is, at the end of the day when the application is complete, a user will have to create an account before they can access other parts of the application. This user information that is needed to create an account needs to be stored somewhere, and we will use a database to store this user information. Additionally, this application will have more than one user. So to be able to keep track of each user, we need to store the information in a database. There are a couple of database engines that can be used. We have PostgreSQL, we have MySQL, we also have SQLite. In this tutorial, I will use SQLite. SQLite is especially good for application now that is still simple, but it is not really limited to just a small application. We need to set up our application to start using a database, and therefore there are a couple of packages that we need to install. And the first package that we need to install is Flask SQL Alchemy. This package helps us to create the schema of our database. And it's especially useful because it uses classes and objects and methods instead of tables and SQL, which makes it so easy to work with a database. And the second package that we can use is Flask Migrate to handle Flask migrations or changes to an update. So from our terminal, we're going to do pip3 install Flask SQL Alchemy Flask Migrate. So once those two packages are successfully installed, we are ready to start working with them. But before we start to use them, I'm going to create a new file called touch requirements.txt in the top level directory. So first I'll ensure that I go back to the top level directory and create touch requirements.txt requirements, and there we have this empty file. In this file I'm going to pass all the packages that we've installed for application. So I'll do pip3 freeze requirements.txt, and there you can see all the packages that we have installed for our application. The first two that we just installed them right now, they're right there, and then the previous one, during a previous video, we installed Flask WTF. Now, with the applications already installed, we need to register them in the application instance. So we'll move into init.py file and say from Flask SQL Alchemy import SQL Alchemy, and then from Flask Migrate import Migrate, and then create instances of those applications. We'll say db equals SQL Alchemy app, and then migrate will be equals to migrate app, and you also pass db. Because you're working with a database, we are going to create a module that is going to handle everything related to the database. So it's going to be in the app subfolder. So we're going to import it from the app subfolder, just like the way we did for the routes module. It's called models. And then we will move into the app subfolder and create an empty file called models.py. and you can see we have that file right here. Okay, so we have a models module, and now we need to pass certain configurations to work with a database. So we'll go into the config.py file, the module that handles everything related to configurations, and create a couple of variables for our configurations. The very first variable is SQL Alchemy database URI equals to os.environ.get. So what we're trying to do is we're trying to get the database URL from the environment variables, and if that does not exist, we are going to create our own, like we did for the secret key. It's normally good to provide a fallback in case one cannot be found. So we'll say or, and then we'll create one for cells, SQLite plus os.path.join, and we're going to create this database file in a variable called best.dir, app.db. So here is the file, the variable that will hold the database file, and this is how it will be accessed: SQLite best.dir, and the database file will be called app.db. The other variable that we'll need to set is SQL Alchemy track modification. So SQL Alchemy track modifications, and you're going to set it to false. Basically, this just ensures that the modifications that we make to a database does not really take place and slow us down. So with that set up, we are ready to go. So we'll move into the models module and start to create our database. So we'll use a class called user and pass in db.model, and the first field in our model will be an ID. So we'll say ID equals db.column, db.integer, comma, primary key equals true. Okay, so we are using the db from the app, so we'll say from app import db. Okay, so with that set, we are also going to create a username for our database. Remember, our form requests for a username and a password. So these are the fields that we are adding to our database. So username equals db.column, and then db.string, because our username is a string and we're setting it to a space of 64, and then we want to index it. Index equals true, and we ensure that that username is unique, so we'll also set it to true. We may also want to take a user's email, and we're going to store it in the database as db.column, then db.string. Again, the email is a string, and we're going to set it to 64 as well, and then we'll index it and ensure that it is unique. True. All right, then password hash equals db.column, db.string. I'm going to set it to a size of 128. So what you want is, you should not store a user's password in your database. Just in case the database is compromised, the attacker does not get the exact password for your users. You want to store it as a password hash, and that's why we are creating a column that will have the password's hash representation. And then just to ensure that we can access all the fields within the database, I'm going to say def repr self, then I'll return an f string, let's say user, and we'll identify the user by their username. So self.username. Alright, now with that setup, we are good to go. Let's create a database migration. We have created a database so far, so we need to create and implement the changes that we have made by running flask-db init. This will create a migration repository, like you can see right here. This migration repository, since we're using the SQLite database, which is a file-based kind of database, all those database migrations that we make will be stored in the migrations subfolder. And then the next command that we will use is flask-db migrate -m, and then we will call it user table. So this will create a script for the database that we've just created, the table that we've just created, and they're normally stored within the version subfolder, and you can see it's right here, user table. So the name that I passed while I was doing db migrate is appended to the file here, and when you open that file, you can see that we have the ID, the username, the email, and the password hash. Okay, so the next thing that we need to do to apply these changes will be to run flask-db upgrade, and the last command applies the changes that you've made. So those are the commands that you need to follow whenever you're working with a database.